From my experience, men especially fall into an interesting pattern. They typically wait until their clothes are almost worn out and they can't stand them before they go out and buy new ones. They avoid the whole process. It's really quite amusing. So off they go to get it over with as quickly as possible. I'll take that one and okay, well, I'll take that one and that one too. Now can I go? And they get it over with, and then they wear those same 3 or 4 suits until they can't stand those anymore, a year, 2 years, maybe 3 years later, and then they go out and they repeat the process. Their solution to looking good is to send their clothing for dry cleaning, because they just wore it yesterday or 3 days ago, and now they've got an upcoming meeting or an important appointment or something that they want to look good for. So they take the suit for dry cleaning and pressing and get the wrinkles out. And a year, year and a half, 2 years later, they look at their wardrobe and they're not quite sure why they're not as enthusiastic about it as they were originally. Well, what they don't realize is those suits have become very tired for a few reasons. First of all, the odds are they weren't really made nearly as well as they could have been, because 30 or 40 years ago, unfortunately, 95% of all of the suits that are manufactured are no longer made with a canvas, and we're going to talk about that a little later. But a canvas is a horsehair and canvas hymo that is what gives a suit its body and its structure. And it's a prohibitively expensive process to put together by hand, particularly when you consider the distribution system of how merchandise is moved from manufacturer to wholesaler to retailer to consumer. Everybody has a business to run, so they have to add a huge profit because they've got workman's comp and rents and advertising and all kinds of things. So the bottom line is, very sadly, that a suit that cost $1,800 to the consumer typically cost about $200 to make, at the most $300. It's pretty frightening stuff. And the only way that a suit can be made for $200 or $300 is with no labor at all to speak of, and to glue it together. It's a process called fusing. It takes a matter of minutes instead of a matter of days and days, or even a week. On the other extreme, whereas the way suits were supposed to have been made, and were made indeed for many, many, many years. So starting off with a suit that's fused or glued together, that just has a sticky backing to the fabric as opposed to a real inner component guts that gives the suit its shape and its long-lasting body, you can't expect much. But let's go back to the scenario where somebody buys 3 suits at a time every other year. Let's say they just spend $1,000 per suit. They may spend $2,000, they may spend $3,000, but let's assume, just for working purposes here, that they spend $1,000 and they buy 3 at a time. And they, over their 40-year career, do that every other year. Now we have 20 cycles at $3,000 or $60,000. If they spent $2,000 a suit, it's $120,000. A lot of people spend more, and a lot of people do it more than once every 2 years. So it could be $240,000 or even more, believe it or not. And without really too much to show for it, except the last 3 suits that they bought, because chances are they're going to wear those 80% of the time, because they wore the others so hard prior to that that even though they're still in the wardrobe, they only get 20% of the wear, and then the suits before that probably get almost no wear. So that's a pretty sad statement. Now, if people understood how to build a wardrobe and they were willing to invest directly into custom clothing that was made for them, there's a much greater value, because you're buying it pretty much directly from the people who are making it, as opposed to a 3 or 4 level distribution system. When clothes are made properly, they'll look better for 25 or 30 years, particularly if you can practically avoid dry cleaning. So tell me how the logic of this sounds. What if you were to invest 4 or 5 years, even 3 if you don't have an everyday use for a suit, building a core wardrobe that would then take you for the rest of your career? You could afford to buy better clothing and build enough clothes so that you could rotate them without needing dry cleaning. You see, people don't dry clean their clothes because they're dirty, but not nearly as much as because they're wrinkled. And the reason they're wrinkled is because they haven't allowed them enough time to return to their natural shape. The Wool Bureau 25 or 30 years ago did a pretty intense study where they found that wool had a memory and that it would return 95% to its original shape, but the process took 3 or 4 weeks to start and another 3 or 4 weeks after that. So if you have the luxury of going something like 6 weeks between wearings, theoretically, you'd never have to have a suit cleaned or pressed. And many people get themselves into that situation. So it's really not theoretical at all, it's actually a fact. Now, if you were to build a core group of wardrobe, vis-a-vis this program that I developed years ago that I called my Wardrobe Plan program, where let's assume that you've got an outfit every 3 or 4 months, and then we have some great bonuses, including once a year an extra outfit at half price, along with depending on the level of commitment you give us, discounts, complimentary ties, discounts on shirts. We can bring your savings anywhere from 15 to as high as 33%. So if you made a commitment for 3 years, let's say, or 4 years or 5 years to to buy 3 outfits a year and you got an extra one at half price, you'd have 4 suits. Over 4 years, you'd have 16 suits. And if you're wearing a suit 4 or 5 days a week, now you're already up to 4 weeks or so between wearings, if my math's correct. And that's giving your suits enough time so that they can return to their natural shape. And I'll make you one promise here. If your suits are properly made the way my suits are made, they'll look as good 20 years from now as they looked when they were brand new, because you're not doing anything to destroy them. You're giving them enough time to return to their normal shape. You're not putting them through the harsh dry cleaning fluids that typically ruin clothing. So if you were averaging, I mean, we could pick a number, and as the years go by, those numbers are going to change. But let's just theoretically say that you were averaging, if someone were to buy 6 suits a year, or let's say 3 suits a year at $2,000 a suit, and an extra one at half price, which would be $7,000, in 4 years, they'd spend $28,000. However, if they were enjoying discounts that came to 30 to 33%, they'd reduce that by, what, $7,000 or $8,000? So they may spend $20,000 instead of $60,000, but in the meantime, be dressed in clothing that makes them look important, because it's made properly, but more importantly, because it fits, and it fits them perfectly, which makes them stand out and look like a general in our society as opposed to a private. We know that people make judgments based on first impressions, and that we have hundreds and hundreds of stories to tell now after 38 years of making clothes for thousands of successful people, and a surprising number of people attribute their success in some part, if not in large part or in its entirety, but at least in some great part, to the impact that they had in creating a first impression, where people assumed and felt that they were successful and gave them business much more quickly and in larger measure than they did prior to their wearing our clothes. So it can be viewed as an investment and not an extravagance. I think a lot of people are intimidated by custom clothing, and they feel that if that were ever something to do in their life, that they might wait and do it as a reward after their success. But it's really a very important tool, and if it's understood to be that and invested early and over a short enough period of time so that you're able to get more before you wear out what you just got, then you can pass that critical mass and have clothing that you'll literally keep forever. I personally will wear a suit that's 6 months older a year one day, a year old one day, and the next day 15-year-old suit, and another day a suit that's 3 or 4 years old, and then the next day an 18 or 19 or 20-year-old suit, and there's virtually no difference. I don't make any judgments at all concerning age before I'll go to see what I consider the most important of prospective clients or the biggest opportunities, because all of my suits essentially are equal. They all look equally good because they've been taken good care of and because I've had enough clothes to rotate over the years. So this is a consideration that I'd like to talk with you about. It's the difference between treating clothing as an event or treating dressing well as a process. And as with saving money or funding our children's college educations, I think most of us stop to think about the time our kids are born that we're going to be in for a major lifetime expense, and we start putting money away and then when we get halfway through, we realize we're not putting it away quickly enough, so we pick up speed, which is, I know exactly what I did for our daughter. However, if you take this approach, it works, which is why nobody would argue with the logic of putting money away for a college education for a child in 20 years. But the truth of the matter is, we do have a 30 or 40 or 50-year career. So why not invest in looking your best, even if it's only for a period of time? The analogies and the metaphors could come quickly. If you want a $100,000 car, spend 3 or 4 or 5 years paying for it and drive it forever. I mean, if it's really a wonderful car and you love it, or $150,000, whatever. And I think the principle of treating yourself to something and savoring it and taking good care of it and dealing with classics as opposed to fads really serves you well.